Wonderful. Wonderful. So is that your house behind you or is that a different background?
No, it's a different background. I wouldn't be too shabby.
Living the life.
I know, it'd be amazing. So how's your day going? It's nice and early where you're at compared to me.
Yeah, 10 a.m. I mean, listen, I'm an early riser. I got 3 young kids. Well, I can't say they're young anymore, 16, 14, 12, but 3 kids, 2 dogs. So it's always a hoot in our house and never stops.
Absolutely. I got a boss, and he has 2 younger ones. One is 2, one is about 14 months, I think. And he says how he has like 3 hours sleep and comes straight into work on the back of it. He says he's just so used to it now. And he's an early riser, up straight away. I was like, mate, how do you even get through the days when you've had like 3 hours sleep? And he's like, just so used to it, mate.
I can't do that. There's no way I could work on 3 hours. I know some people that do, that coach, and that is insane to me. I need
Absolutely.
my 6, 7, 8 hours if I'm lucky.
Because he texts me, he's like, "Oh, I'm up," and it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes I'll be up like 6:30, 6:40. I'm like, mate, I couldn't get up 40 minutes earlier. It's just such a struggle. So
Yeah.
I sometimes he comes in looking so fresh. I'm like, how do you look so fresh?
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I got to be at work. I'm a high school math teacher, so I got to be at work at by 6:45. So it's always an early day. So we're on Easter break right now. So it's we don't have to get out of bed too soon for the next couple of days.
Likewise for me. So that's why I've been able to facilitate the call today. So glad that our timelines could sync up and have you on the podcast, which is really appreciated.
I appreciate being on. This is sort of exciting, just to share, talk, have a conversation. So I'm excited for it.
Me too, because you've got 24 years experience, if I'm correct, in Pittsburgh area in terms of your overall coaching experience and what you've been doing.
Yeah. 24 years has gone by in a flash. It sounds weird to say 24 years. I started coaching when I was 18 years old.
Oh, right. Because, time does fly by so quickly then. And realistically, I'm at the sort of same age range when I started coaching at 18 and when you started coaching. But when you started, did you plan on coaching at 18 or was it something you sort of fell into? How did that come about?
So my wife and I, we were dating at the time, attended the University of Pittsburgh, and I had dreamed of playing soccer there, maybe walking on. I was really always torn between, I was also into basketball as well, and being a student in soccer, football. And funny enough, in my dorm room the one day, I got a call from my athletic director from high school, and they needed a middle school soccer coach. And so I've foregone playing my playing days and decided to hop into coach middle school soccer and started developing relationships there. So I was going to school to be a teacher. I knew I was going to coach at some point. I didn't think it would be at 18 years old, but had developed a good relationship with our athletic director there, who thought of me when the position came open at the last minute. So hopped on it and never looked back. Been coaching. I coached high school or middle school, high school age, and then club for 24 years now, but also coached basketball along the way as well. So a lot of parallels between the two sports that we can get into as well. But all ages, genders, just getting involved as much as I can over the years.
I love that. And what a great sort of way to get into coaching. And I think that's how coaching tends to start, is that ambition to do it, that love for it, and then just that relationship. And all it takes is that one conversation and suddenly opens up the door. And then, 20 odd years later, you're into coaching. And sometimes it's just on the back of a conversation that was had.
Yeah. And the one thing I impress upon a lot of whether it be teachers, younger players, anybody, because there's always like a big push to, sorry, I'm going to have visitors that come in to see what I'm doing here with my kids waking up. But the one thing is, playing experience sometimes matters, but it's not everything. All levels, you don't have to play, top Division I soccer or top academy soccer, things along those lines. For me, I don't have college playing experience. I certainly could have played in college, but my life took me in a different direction. And So, my first year, I remember my first year coaching, I had 16 players. It was sort of a new program. They had just gone, so they didn't get enough players initially back in 2000. It was co-ed for middle school. They went finally, they were able to get enough players to do boys and girls separate. I had 16 total kids, and I think we won 2 games and honestly got destroyed in every other game. But we had a blast, and we went from 16 players to the next year 36 players, and didn't lose a match. So in the course of a year, a lot can happen. And from there, I was hooked. That first year was rough, but we had fun. And then from there, just added players. We had fun. I had no idea what I was doing. All I could do was copycat whatever coach I had and do what they did. But you learn as you go.
And I think I'm very similar with you there in terms of by the time I was 16, 17, 18, I decided that I didn't want to play anymore. I wasn't enjoying playing, and I didn't enjoy that transition from the youth game up until our senior levels. And so for me, being a 16, 17, 18-year-old playing with blokes who are like 25, 30 odd, I didn't want to be in that environment, because changing from a youth setting when you're around everyone your age and doing it for, those different passions and reasons, and going into a senior game, which is a very different environment, I didn't enjoy that transition. So for me, I always knew I wanted to coach, and therefore, because I didn't want to play anymore, my ambitions drove into coaching. And therefore, at times when I do coach, I'm like, actually, if I had that experience, would I be a better coach? Would I be able to understand the dressing room environment a bit more? But as you say there, as you gain that experience over the years with the players that you work with, and as you continue to develop and evolve around that, then I don't think you need that playing experience. I think there's little things, yes, you will miss out on, because that's what comes with the experience. But I don't think it's essential that you have to play the game to be a coach.
I 100% agree. 100% agree. Again, it's not a bad thing, obviously. You to continue to be coached by, high level people with experience. But there's obviously multiple pathways you can take. And, I think you're seeing it pop up all over Europe right now. You have coaches that don't have the licensing, they don't have the playing experience, but they're super successful because they bought in and they've done the hard work. They've probably created some good relationships along the way, and through doing the work in the background, they're able to excel. So many different ways to get where we're all going. As long as you love the game, I think you can get to whatever that goal may be.
I absolutely agree with you, and that's what I believe it comes down to, is that and that goal. And I think if you channel that ambition and drive on the experience on top of it, it's certainly going to benefit that. And I know, being a teacher like yourself, once you compare and bring in the experience of a teacher into coaching as well, I think that adds another layer rather than just coaching. Because as teachers, obviously, we understand teaching and learning, the different methodologies behind that experience, how individual learners are going to learn, that inclusivity that comes with it, and everything that surrounds teaching. I think we incorporate so much more into coaching when we are a teacher, and that combination is really important, and how that plays across as well.
Yeah, we were going back and forth with some notes before the show here, and and you see it so much more now than you did 20 some years ago. But with the awareness of mental health and things that play a part into the human aspect, maybe it was one thing that was just sort of natural for me a little bit, but as a teacher and a coach, I really always cared about how the kids felt, and making sure they're smiling, making sure we're chatting, we're talking about things that aren't just around the success of a soccer team or a football team. I think back to that first team I ever coached. We did well because we had a lot of fun together. It wasn't perfect. There's probably if I went back, and I watched a training session or a game or things I may have said within, the realm of the game. But at the end of the day, I think it's how much you care about the people that you're in contact with. And that, to me, is more evident than ever. And I think that message is becoming true. And people are putting it down and talking about it quite a bit. And that, to me, if whether I'm teaching math at school, with my kids at home, or if I'm at this point working with so many different teams, it truly is. It's more fun to get to know the kids, and then to get a result, because at the end of it, as you've coached, I've coached thousands and thousands of games at this point. You know, a lot of kids, they don't remember them, you know, especially at the young ages, you know, and certainly remember my playing days. You know, some people sit back and reminisce and think, I don't remember much about, you know, the results or the plays in a game and things like that. You definitely, but I remember the relationships I created. I remember how my coaches treated me. I remember those extra conversations that we had. I remember the little things. You know, a quick, for instance, when I was playing, I was a freshman in high school, and we had a few players that came out for the team. They weren't, you know, they weren't necessarily into it for soccer. They were there to participate in an activity, to build a resume, to go off to college. And one of the players, I think, ended up going to the University of Notre Dame, and he taught me a technique he uses for remembering how to do assignments and basically creating a to-do list that I still use today. I have no idea how we did in that season, but I remember that specific thing on how to make sure you're creating a checklist of things that are important to you and getting them done. So again, it's those little things that we sometimes forget, that are so impactful to people as we move through the coaching experience. And of course, you know, the game brings us together. You know, teaching in the classroom, the math classroom brings us together, and there's a reason we're together, and that is to grow and be better. So trying to always keep that in mind, and that's tough as a human. That's tough. You know, when winning and losing is involved and things along those lines. But if you keep that as at the forefront, I don't think you ever truly lose. And that may sound cliche, but I think that's part of the belief in what we do and what keeps us going.
I love the way that you put that as well. I think that you won't truly lose because of those relationships, because everyone has that different personality, as you say, and they have that different ambition to come into the team. So they might come into the team to build up their resume. They might come in to compete. They might come in because it's a good program to be part of, but they might not have the ambition to be a professional footballer, for example. But they might utilize that experience in terms of a sport in nature in another capacity later on within their lives. So once you have that sort of combination of different personalities, people and their ambitions, I think those relationships which are going to be held on for the long term, you actually can look back and actually look and go, right, that was actually beneficial to me because I learned off this person because they were really academic in terms of what they've done, and I took those skills away from them. I learned off this person because they taught me how to be street smart. I learned off this person because they taught me what to do on a soccer pitch, how to react to certain situations, how to respond to referees, how to have that relationship. I think all these different combinations and traits that we take away from people, once you combine them and build upon your own experience and then shape that, you start to shift in terms of who you want to be and how that looks. But once it comes down to that real narrative of relationships and that core component, one thing for me that I enjoy most within my classroom is not the content that I teach. That is the bonus. And I go, actually, that was a really good lesson, or they responded to that content, or that was really good because we achieved the learning outcomes. But it's those relationships and seeing the kid sat in front of me going, oh, actually, he's smiling, she's enjoying it, she's picked up these questions, and all these different combinations of enjoyment that I can see in front of me and seeing the responses of my students. I'm like, do you know what? That's what the impact is for me. As long as they leave here happy, smiling, and they've taken away some of the learning elements, they can have that motivation to engage again next week. And then over that period of time, those learning outcomes will be achieved, they will be attained because of the relationships, because the enjoyment that has been presented in terms of this teaching, in terms of coaching, and that combination which you put across as well when you work with the young people that you have in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, I don't know if you've noticed this change, but within the classroom, within coaching, we've, you know, and this is my, I'm in 20th year in the classroom. You know, when I first started, it was very much, I was a dictator of knowledge, and I would lecture, or you know, and on the soccer field or the basketball court, I was the one in charge. I was the one, I don't want to necessarily say joysticking, but there was a set manner in the way it had to be, and this is the way you play. And if you veer off from that, I remember I always said, like, you know, there was a coach I played for when I was really young that if I took more than 2 touches, I was coming out of the game. And it was just a very, and now you do see an element of more of a facilitator than a dictator of knowledge. And being that facilitator, something that I've really enjoyed, and I think all science points to this anyway, is that in that it's a little bit messy, but out of that mess is where some order comes about and where the learning can happen. And it has to be messy first to figure those things out. And sometimes that's tough as a coach, because especially in soccer, And the education, I don't think, has flown through to parents and all coaches at this point. But what session are parents going to see and think is better coaching? One where they come in and they're playing right away, maybe a 3v3+1, and the coach is observing, or are parents going to see a whole bunch of cones set up and the kids are doing one thing to one cone and then they're waiting and then doing another thing to another, and on the coach's command they're doing this? And a lot of parents would think, wow, the setup with all the cones, look at that looks great. When meanwhile the kids coming in that are excited, they're doing the 3v3+1, the counter goals, and now the coach is stopping every once in a while to for instance, maybe just plant a seed that they're going to work on a little bit later, or maybe it's a question, some sort of guided question, and that to me is sort of the evolution of what needs to take place. Especially, I don't know what it's like where you're at, but here in the United States, a lot of times you do see that order is desired by parents because they think order means learning, and that is definitely not the case. Kids got to draw out the learning process, and they got to take those pictures, and then they got to create those frameworks in their mind, and then of course as coaches we have to be clear on what we create and how we build off of that. And that becomes really challenging because now that's where the true experience comes in. The coaching points you want to make, you can't focus on everything. So it's again, it definitely been an evolution. It needs to go way, way, way further. But again, that's the educational part of this. The changes I've seen over the last 20 some years, we're definitely in a way better place now than we were, say when I played. And we have a lot of old timers that talk about that stuff, how much different it is now. And honestly, how much better the players are. I mean, my own 3 kids at home are way better than I ever was. And that's only because of the level of coaching they've received, from different people over the years.
I like the way that you put that as well. And I think that's an important point to talk about, is that point of order. And I think that perception comes into it because when I first started, I only knew what I learned from, and that was the coaches around me and the way that I was brought up. And I was very fortunate in a way when I started coaching. We were at a great transition here in Wales, whereby we were starting to change from the old sort of style of game into a more modern approach. And we're still seeing that continuously change now. But when I first started, I was like, right, actually, I need to put out all these cones. I need to do a lot of different types of exercises. I need to use the slalom poles a lot. I need to be looking as if I'm doing a lot of aerobic and endurance in terms of my training. And all of that over a period of time was like, I need a lot of equipment to do this, this, and this. And then over a period of time, and as I've continued to adapt, I've actually used less equipment. So sometimes you might see a pitch set up, you might only see 6 cones laying out a sort of pitch that we need because we're on a 3G enclosed cage anyway. And I've actually, I want to just slip off the bit of a pitch here. I want to play on a bit of an angle, so I'm going to use 6 cones to angle these off, and then I can transition throughout real quickly because I'm picking up that cone, I can move that one. I haven't got loads of cones to move. We can actually broaden up the size of the pitch a little bit more, and therefore it's more effective and efficient. We got a lot more contact time. We're a lot more proficient in the way that we do things, whereas when I had a lot of equipment out, it was taking a lot of time to transition through a lot of it. So you go off, get a drink, actually spend 2, 3, 4 minutes having a drink, I can set up. And I still see coaches doing that now. And I'm like, actually, that's a lot of time being wasted. And therefore, if we stop 3 or 4 times for a 4-minute break, that's 16 minutes lost over a period of session. So you add that up over a total of a month. That's actually quite a lot of contact time. And sometimes we put too much science, sometimes we put too much maths into it. But realistically, that is a lot of time wasted over the course of a year, which could be contact time. So for us, in the way we're going here in Wales and the UK, is that contact and ball time has to be at the paramount. And therefore, our transitions have to be very quick. And therefore, when I look at my way that I teach and the way that I am in terms of coaching, there's a lot of facilitation and guided discovery learning, and therefore it's less routine. There's routine in terms of how we enter the sessions, how that may look, and how we may access different types of and parts of the session. But overall, that facilitation, the way that freedom comes across, and how quick transitions can be to ensure maximized learning within that capacity, I think has really shaped me in terms of how I've learned from my experiences firsthand and on the pitch, rather than being a textbook coach or textbook teacher and then trying to deploy everything in terms of routine, standards, framework, and all of that. And as you said, and I love the way you put it, is that mess that comes into it. But I think there is that structure which comes as a result of that mess, naturally because of the way that the young people engage in front of us.
Yeah, and certainly, and again, your philosophy, my philosophy, everything is shaped by the people we are surrounded by. And if I think about my own coaching experience, we could probably go off on a million tangents here, but the one thing that definitely helps in the coaching realm is that when I coached I coached middle school and high school, and again I coached basketball, so I never really got involved too much in club soccer until my kids got involved. And it was at their club, and a coach invited me. She was saw me on the sideline, had saw a quote of mine in a newspaper, and she was like, "Hey, you have coaching experience. Can you come out and help me with this? Because we're down some coaches." And I was like, "Sure." So I helped with 5, 6, 7-year-olds, and she's like, "Hey, you did pretty good today. Do you want to stick around with an older group?" And this was, it was 07s, so they're like at the end of they're like juniors in high school now. You're looking at 17-year-olds. They were 9, 10-year-olds at the time, and I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so I got involved. At the club level and it was academy age. So you're looking at your U9s, U10s. And at that point it hit me, like I was so excited every single night to go to training, because I'd be with 3 to 4 other high level people that are super experienced, that were meeting the kids' needs at the age they were at. With you're training with 2 sessions, and then you're asked to stay after to do 2 more sessions with other age groups. And now it was just like all this information coming in, seeing all of these things they're doing, they're sharing those things up ahead of time. And I'm like, that was, after 10 years of coaching sort of on my own at a school level. And I'm like, wow. And again, for new coaches, I tell them all the time, coaching school is cool. And here in the United States, at a high school soccer match, if you're making playoffs or you're getting further in the playoffs, you get a lot of people to attend those games. But at the club level, you have a chance to be on the field with so many different age groups every single night after night, observing, running sessions, and talking to people. And what really inspired me at that time, this was about 7 years ago, was just getting to the field and hearing their ideas, the questions they were asking, and everything circled around having fun and teaching. That the commitment to the kids was amazing, and that shaped everything. It was just like a new world had opened to me in the coaching game. And we're here in Pittsburgh. It's not a big market, but there's plenty of different clubs that as the way it goes. Unfortunately, it's harder and harder to find, good teachers, good coaches. And so it's pretty easy to get involved anywhere you would want to get involved. And again, with, in Pittsburgh not being a massive city, there's plenty of clubs as you go with a high degree of people with a lot of knowledge, a lot of investment in the game. And so for me, that was the most inspiring thing for me, that sort of just exponentially grew my love for the game. Because with coaching, again, at the school level, I only knew what I knew, and I was always surrounded, I was the head coach, and I had assistants that were phenomenal, but we only knew what we knew in our small group. And once I was able to start branching out and meeting a lot more people, getting involved, understanding meeting coaches that had coached, whether it be overseas, whether it's Division 1, 2, 3, college level, junior college level, players that had played at a high, at high major universities, as well as players that just got done, playing Division 2 or Division 3, and then hopping in and sharing their experiences. The club was what, for me, truly made my made my eyes open up to what the game could be even more. And so and the nice part was, I didn't leave that just the club. I brought that back to high school, and was able to elevate my teams to a much higher degree by the engagement I was able to do with the experiences I was provided through the club level. So meshing those all together has provided me with a really nice, it's an eclectic, experience within soccer. So working with academy, working with high school age, and then popping off to 07 girls. And then I'm working with, a much older boys team. And then the weird part to me was, and again, we talking about like just developing a mastery within coaching. The weird part to me was when people started asking my opinion, because to me, like, I felt like such an imposter that I wasn't capable, or I didn't have the knowledge to provide those things. And then when people started, and within the club started asking questions, like, what would you do here and there? And I was like, oh my goodness, like, they trust my opinion, and so then I was like, okay, so I got to take authority over that as well. So I got to have a little bit of confidence in my decision making here. But back to the whole facilitator idea, I wasn't going to be a dictator of knowledge. And one thing you had to learn, is to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, let me ask somebody else, was something you have to get very comfortable with. And a story I always tell is, I wear yellow glasses, one, because, and this is a total leap off of what we were talking about, but I wear yellow glasses. Honestly, I bought them during COVID because they were prescription blue blockers and I was always staring at a computer, but I bought the yellow ones just to make my wife mad. And just to see what her reaction would be. And then as I started wearing them, I felt uncomfortable wearing them because I thought they looked weird. And then I realized, well, this is a vulnerability I need to get over. So I just kept wearing them. And so some people think I'm an idiot. Some people think that it's cool. Other people, really don't know what to make of it. The president of the club I was with kept calling me Elton John. And again, I embraced that part of, who I was becoming. I wasn't going to have, as a coach, I wasn't going to have a fear of not knowing. I wasn't going to have a fear of, being vulnerable to what the game brings. And so, I tell that story to a lot of people because, we can't, as coaches, it's a lonely game. Sometimes you're on the sideline alone. And you got to be confident within yourself, but you also have to be okay with the downside of it too. And so that vulnerability becomes massive for us as coaches. As we grow, it's going to be very, very hard to grow. Apologize. Amazon driver must be out front.
No
Got to be
problem.
hard to grow if we aren't vulnerable and recognize our areas that we can be a little bit better at. We all could probably pick out coaches or teachers or people that have a wall set up, and it is the way it is, and you'll never get through to them. And that's a challenging situation to work with, especially as a coach with a team, within a club, within a high school. Like, there are so many relationships that you need to work through and build. And it's hard to be supportive or be supported if you don't have that level of vulnerability.
I think there's such a great piece there in terms of what you say, and I think there's a lot in there to really unpack and how that comes across. So, there was an element of imposter syndrome at a younger age that you had, or being approached a few years back by seeking support from others, and then going, well, actually, I've got the knowledge which I can provide them with, and overcoming that fear of, why are people coming to me? Actually, they're coming to me because I've got a lot of experience in the way that I can shape the narrative of this can really be beneficial to them. So, am I actually an imposter because of the experience which I've accumulated together? And therefore, it's actually important to share that with other people. But you then also talk about how that reflected on you and how you've overcome that vulnerability on a personal level, not just on professional, but how that personality comes across. And therefore that reflection comes into the players as well that you work with, because as we have those different personalities and as we have those different players, they're going to have a lot of different vulnerabilities. And when we shape together a different squad, especially in a high school, for example, they're coming together and we have to overcome those barriers for them to become a team first. And therefore it comes back to that relationship piece and those people first, which makes the narrative and that important foundations towards developing that group, developing the foundations, overcoming what the barriers are, how to support one another, overcoming those fears and vulnerabilities. And therefore you become that inspiration for becoming a coach, has reflected in terms of how that comes across and what you're able to do in terms of understanding yourself, and how that really reflects how players can feel, and seeing that as a teacher, seeing that as a coach, and that combination of inclusion and then coaching and understanding personalities, and then seeing your group different to another coach in terms of how a player might be withdrawn from a session, and therefore they're withdrawn from it because they've got a bit of a fear factor, and therefore it's never been addressed by the coaches they previously had. So where is the coaching outcomes there? Or actually it's at high school level because they've come to Coach Alex, and therefore he's been able to understand what someone else perhaps hasn't seen. And therefore what he has seen, if that hasn't been identified at that stage, if he wasn't there, then therefore this player might not make it or have the opportunities to overcome some of the fears because they've never previously been identified. So this combination of coaches and how that comes across can really reflect an imposter syndrome, but it can actually culminate together the identities and skill sets of all the different individuals which come together. And I think that's what creates a great coaching team. And then that overcomes those fears and it overcomes that vulnerability and how that comes across. But just touching upon club and high school soccer, we're very similar here in terms of that we have sort of two programs, but our high school program in terms of football has taken a very much of a detrimental back seat here. So our school football program back in the 80s, 90s was a fantastic program, but we're seeing less and less of that here now. We have less of a structure to it. And when it comes to high school coaching, there is a big difference between club coaching. And when I've been teaching in different high schools, they've asked me to take on teams because of my experience. And I've done it at previous high schools, and this is the one high school I haven't done it at. I'm like, because there is such a different level between club and high school for me. And therefore I don't enjoy what we do at high school, but everything that I've tried to do at club, I've wanted to reflect in terms of what I've done at high school, in terms of bringing those high standards, in terms of trying to approach the game and the training sessions, how to increase those standards, how to look at increasing the opportunities for players at a young age. Because I know when I was a player in high school, I didn't have the opportunities because there was a lack of team. There was one team and you either made it or you didn't. And therefore the good players always played. And then everyone else like me who wasn't as good as a player, therefore never had that playing time and then just dropped off after year 7 or year 8. So therefore, once I've taken that back into terms of my high school coaching, I'm like, actually, we should have 2 or 3 teams. We should be looking at all these components. So there is that level which I've tried to bring in and upgrade that game. But the high school approach for us here is very, very different to the US in terms of how that comes across. So if a school has a team, it has a team. If a school doesn't have a team, then that's part of it. If they have a game, they have a game. If they don't have a game, there's no real fluidity towards it, no structure in terms of a framework or how it has to be, for example. But when you touch upon your glasses, and the last point here is, until you actually mentioned them, I just took that at face value of that they're a pair of glasses, you know. But for you, that just shows what level of insecurity or vulnerability, as you said, whereby touching upon that point of maybe someone else hasn't recognized it or someone else has seen that of value, and then therefore you might be working with someone and they actually, well, Alex, why do you have this issue? Well, I've got this issue because this is this. And that's the same for a player, and we need to understand when to have those conversations with a player and when they might be feeling something, which is really important. So that piece that you put together there, I think, captures so much. There's so much in terms of that is so important.
Yeah, you know, I think as a coach, when players are in your care, I mean, obviously another cliche that you hear is they don't what is it? They don't. It's not how much you know until you show how much you care. And being able to disarm players when they come in, you know, especially to a new environment. If I'm a new coach with them, how they perceive to be themselves, something that is extremely important to me as a coach. And again, this is something that was developed. You know, I could share a ton of stories of how I was not this way, you know, but authenticity has become something very important. Letting kids, you know, be themselves in your care. And that to me brings out who they are as a human more so than anything else. You know, there's a team element to everything, but the team is only a collection of the individuals. And so, when we first, you know, again, when I first started coaching, it was, it got to be this way, and this way. It was very rigid. It was very regimented. And don't ever give your opinion. You know, the coach is always right. And, you know, at some point, someone questioned why. And some people get bent out of shape. And I don't think there's a better question in the world than why. And that shapes what everything we should do. So what is your why in how you approach everything, whether it be life, whether it be the game of soccer, teaching mathematics, but any I get that question a lot more in mathematics as to why or when am I ever going to use this. But, you get the point. I mean, it's important to draw those connections. It's important to lead the players along for purpose. And so again, I do think that starts with disarming them, allowing them to be comfortable, allowing them to be authentic and be themselves. And then that fosters so many other things. We could go on, but creativity usually doesn't come from somebody unless they're, comfortable, and feel that they can, be themselves in front of you. When they're trying to be someone they're not, it's hard to get the most out of them. And that's again with soccer. I mean, I'll scroll on Instagram and I'll see, videos of hard tackles by center backs, and then I'll see videos of Ronaldinho. I mean, there is such a massive difference in the level of players that make it at certain points. And those are, we're talking about high level players in a Ronaldinho or a Messi or a Nesta, but there's qualities of those types of players in all the kids we coach, on the boys and girls side. And so being able to foster that creativity. And I learned this lesson a long time ago. One of the first teams I coached, I had a player that was super creative, and in Western PA, it was about hard work and share and, give up the ball. There is zero selfishness, blah, blah, blah. And I, as a young coach, was like, yeah, this player, he's doing what he wants, not what I want. It got to be what I want, and you got to do it my way. And I think back, I'm like, this player still was able to go play on in college and stuff like that. But I wasn't doing my best to foster his creativity within the team setting, and then also supporting a message to the parents of like, hey, like this is how we do things. And that's something 15 years ago, but I would handle it much, much differently now by allowing players again to be themselves and fostering that authenticity, because that's who they're going to be in this world. We can mold and shape with good habits and principles and values and beliefs, which is all very important, but there's still going to be individuals that are going to have to decode what that is for them and then how to express that.
I really like the way that you put that, decode that and express that for the way they are, way they will be, how that looks for the future and that authenticity, and looking at how that person's actually going to be later on in life and how they truly are away from the pitch as well in the classroom. But the way that you piece it together in terms of disarming players and that perception, looking how that new groups, those new environments come together, how that authenticity has to become so important in terms of that. And that team is a collection of individuals, and therefore that collection of individuals is a collection of different personalities. And we have to overcome those barriers which really put that together. But by fostering creativity and fostering an environment which allows creativity is so important, whether that's on and off the pitch. So when you have these team building exercises, which may not include being on the pitch, but actually maybe going for a group dinner or something like that, or whether it's an activity where they can get up and maybe make, a little bit of a fool of themselves, it just overcomes that vulnerability and that fear factor. And therefore it opens up that authenticity. Actually, that person loves being, a singer and being a dancer. Or why is that something to laugh at? Well, actually, it's not, because later on in life, when the players are going out to the clubs together and this player's throwing moves, they're going to be the one who's respected later on in life. So that comes together in terms of maybe overcoming that perception at a younger age and opening up that psychology of players. But that question of why is so important. Why don't we allow players to do this? Why don't we have this? Why don't we create an opportunity? And therefore, that's where you start to bridge together those relationships, that authenticity, that environment, especially at a club level, I find, because you can put on even more events, more activities, which then fosters that relationships and how that comes in play. But then I think sometimes by having too many routines, we take away that creativity, we take away that authenticity, because we're trying to dictate, as you say, that dictatorship of knowledge or dictator of knowledge, and how that really comes across. And therefore, as we dictate that knowledge, we dictate the way we want it to be coached, how we want things to be taught. And therefore, we're taking away personalities, we're taking away opportunities of questioning, we're taking away opportunities of engagement. And once we take those things away, we're taking away levels of learning. And therefore, those levels of learning are taken away. Players' ambitions, motivations are withdrawn. And therefore, they don't particularly then have that ambition to come back to training or be in that lesson. And therefore, that engagement of learning drops massively. So when you said about that why, I think it's so important, just the simple question of why. And some people might see that as annoying. But I think if you're continuously asking why, it's because you want to unlock every layer. And therefore, that individual might be going off and researching a number of different elements and components of something. And therefore, they're constantly asking that why. They're trying to understand a lot more, and they're trying to piece that together. And what I do in teaching, I love your point as well, especially as it comes to maths. I teach all subjects in terms of what I do, in terms of I work in a behavior unit, so I teach every subject. And we're a big focus on maths, and I teach maths regularly. So, sir, why do we need this? Sir, what's the point of algebra? Sir, why does this come together? Well, actually, later on in life, when you buy your own house, you actually might need to work out how much space you have in a room to try and get your sofa in. And therefore, that's a later lesson in life. Well, actually, use algebra every time you go to a shop, because you might need X, Y, and Z, and you're piecing that together in a formula. So there's actually big lessons in terms of life and how that comes across. But I think the way that you put it, by having purpose behind it and linking it together to what a player relates to or individual, is going to open up their learning to really engage them rather than trying to dictate that information to them.
Yeah, it's and again, it's a process of comfortability, and being able to assess the players you have, and it becomes a game of how much further you can push them or not. And again, like for me, this is as a brand new coach that's coming in, you're gonna have coaches that probably get it a little bit more. Maybe they had a really good influence on them. I had phenomenal coaches that I love. That's why I'm still here. But as the game has evolved and changed, it's important for me to stay up, on all of those things. So like going back to the mental health side of things, something I learned massively this year, especially coaching girls, was it was my first time coaching at the high school level on the girls' side, whereas I coached club level girls at a successful club, where they came in engaged, ready to go and battle every time. And it was, they had very specific goals about them. When you go into high school, again, it's a collection of kids that are trying to participate. And we're going through an activity, and I could tell, one player was a little disinterested, and she was someone we depended on, a very good player. And I'm like, man, she is, it was bothering me. And I'm like, she's not giving it her all. And, so, we stop play and just give a little bit of a message to the team, like, hey, we need everybody. Like, again, the way I coach is through a lot of small-sided games, always trying to be engaging. I was like, listen, if not everyone's bought in, then it's going to be hard for us to progress this to the next thing. We need everybody dialed in, everybody focused. And I got less and less. And then, so I then approached individually, and you realized quickly that, not every player coming in, there's a lot of baggage that they bring with them. It could be something that happened at school, could be something that happened at home, could be a relationship issue. As players get older in high school, sometimes you do run into, boyfriend, girlfriend issues, things along those lines. And that hit me once again. It was another learning point for me, was this isn't all about me as the coach and my message. Like, there's a massive dynamic to all of this. And meeting them where they were. And that was a big moment that I learned from. And sometimes you got to pull back a little bit too, because as much as I am, my wife will tell you, my kids will tell you, my obsession with soccer only grows. Not everybody's like that. And not everybody, it can put all of the other stuff happening in their life away. As much as we would want that to happen, hey, you step in between these lines. This is your, this is your safe space and everything else, which is true. But for young adolescents, it is tough to leave those things behind. So again, being aware of, it isn't always about you, coach, and what your demands are. There are a lot of dynamics at play here. Again, going back to that human element that I was missing, and I needed, and it allowed me to reflect, like, okay, sometimes you do have to let a little bit go. And sometimes, maybe, like I've always said, when you pull a group in and you give those general messages, so, they're not always it's not always received by the player you want it to be received by. And so being able to change the way I approach individuals and have those conversations, again, to draw the most out of them, or even to check in, like, that made me learn, like, wait a minute, I'm here only for soccer. I need to do a little bit of a better job of meeting my players, reading that body language, checking in. And from there, our relationship with me and that player grew quite a bit, and allowed me to have even more respect for that player and what they can do for the team, as well as others, because even having other kids, hey, look, it's not in this case, but in other cases, they're having a rough day. Hey, this just happened, okay. And again, it fostered that growth of the team. And again, I'll probably say this 100 times as we talk, but going back to the human element before the player element is something so important for all young adults. And even, I mean, listen, I'm 42. Sometimes I need that within a work environment. There's not a point in which we grow up and we're like, yep, no, we don't need anyone to care about us anymore. This is an ongoing process, until probably the day we die.
I'm completely with you there, and I love that way that you put that human element before the player element. And just reflecting upon myself there, I was chatting to someone the other day, and this person I was chatting to was an academy manager now, and he was a previous academy manager at an academy that I worked at. And there's been about 6 years difference between being at the first post to the post he is now. And when I first met him, he was all very player focused, technically driven, had to be high standards, and he still instills that, and he's an excellent coach. But when he was talking the other day, he talked about all about understanding players, understanding the individuals. And therefore, when I met him 6 years ago, I never once had those kind of conversations with him. And he never presented that in a way he came across in the work that he did and every type of engagement that I had with him. And it's only until now, 6 years later, he's still in a very good position, and he's maneuvered on into a new club and a new academy. He's shaping his perspective, his narrative in a different way because of the experiences which he's had, but also the way that the game has continuously adapted. And therefore, he's a coach who's come round to a very different way of thinking. And therefore, he may not have even considered that 6 years ago because that wasn't the way that his mind was built, all the influences that he had from his shaped experiences. And I know that a lot of teachers in the environment that I work in now and the way that we're changing our culture within our school is very much focused on the person. It is focused on that human nature. It is focused a lot more on the mental health. And therefore, that change of what we've seen in the last 10 years, and this still impacts of COVID and still what we're seeing now, is that education is massively changing, and how it's going to look again in 10 years is going to be very different. So you're either on that pathway where you get left behind because you're not willing to adapt, and therefore you start to see a lot more issues arise because you haven't adapted, therefore, in your classroom, or you continuously adapt and therefore you're ready to be adaptable to every situation which is presented. So the way that human element comes across is more important now than ever, and I think it's going to continue to go that way. And therefore we're going to see a very different structure and order of things in terms of organizations, coaching, education, relationships, how everything comes in terms of that. But I like the way that you say as well in terms of the baggage that players might bring, and therefore what you want to instill and might want to achieve as a coach, or might have set in terms of your standards, the way that you want your team to play this year, might be very different. It might be a 3-year plan actually, and therefore by year 2 you're only going to start seeing the outcomes which you wanted to see in year 1, because year 1 was about integrating new players, understanding them, understanding what learning experiences they've had, where their different technical levels are, what their baggage may be, actually understanding the geographical area that they're at, adapting to the environment, adapting to the institution which they're going to be. They actually found their academic studies a lot more harder in year 1, and therefore their IDPs have set them up for year 2 to actually have a bit more allocation towards time to focus on their studies, because it's what maybe kept them falling behind last year, and therefore it had an impact on sports, and they were deciding to miss sports sessions because they had to catch up on studies, etc. So that whole combination of year 1 into year 2 and that transition comes on that human element and understanding where each individual is going to be. And I think it comes down to those processes which you talk about a lot and how that comes together and how you really piece that in terms of overcoming these situations which we see. But for you, if you're given a new team next year, for example, ready for September, and you're starting coaching, you want to overcome these vulnerabilities. You want to bring your group together. So for you, in terms of that pre-season planning or planning over summer when you might be off, what would you do if you had a new group in September to integrate them and bring them together as a team?
Yeah. So the first thing I think would be, one, within whatever, if it's my team, say if it's a high school or a club level, whatever it may be, what standards are set from above, and how do the leaders that impact my job impact then the players. And so one is having a culture that's created, and instilling that culture right away. So if this happened to me again a year ago, I took over a high school program. It was very important for me to instill the culture that I thought that I could bring. And then I hired assistant coaches that I had worked with that I know believed in that culture and had been a part of it. and were again on the same level of what the school wanted. So before I ever even met with the players, it was about it was all about hiring the right people that were going to be working with them as well, and people that again could not only make me better but make the players better. Then the next thing was creating. Once we would meet and did meet, was establishing those culture standards. The one thing was that was very important to me. We're not, I want to make sure that the players were competing for each other, not against each other or pitted against one another, that we're all here for the common good. One player being successful does not mean someone else is unsuccessful. I'm a big believer, and I had to learn this as a coach, because as a coach, comparison is the thief of joy. As a young coach, when I thought I was doing everything right, but other coaches were winning, it really made me mad. Because I'm like, how are they winning when, I'm doing I got this talent and I got, this level, whatever. And so making sure players understood that there's enough shine to go around, that we don't need to worry about, oh my goodness, this person's doing well, therefore I'm not. So again, establishing those cultural standards, and as simple as one, getting on the field together and playing, and encouraging the type of talk. Two, making sure that, as we developed a team, that we weren't going to have cliques. Certainly there's going to be kids that tend towards other players more so than others. That's just how this all works. I mean, you can't have a group of, in a high school team, you have 36 kids. You can't have 36 best friends. Kids are going to tend towards each other. But it was very important that as they did have maybe little groups here or there that may form, that they understood how to respect one another, how to integrate as well. It's not my quote. I think it's Bill Parcells, the coach of New York Jets and others. I apologize for any American football fans that I'm drawing a blank on where Parcells coached. But there was a sign that I saw in a locker room through Twitter when Twitter first came about that said, losers assemble in small groups and talk about coaches and players. Winners get together and talk about ideas on how to win and become better. And that, to me, and again, that's paraphrasing, I probably butchered that, but I 100% believe that. The second whispering starts to happen, small groups start to share things, that is when you're going to see the culture start to crumble. And so being able to be open and allow players, listen, and it's easier nowadays. This is a challenging thing, because parents take advantage of it. Players can take advantage of it. And again, it has to be set in the right tone. But something I got early on in coaching was when, we were trying to allow players to advocate for themselves, which is important. They had to do it face to face, which is still the right way to do things. Making eye contact and discussing things is very uncomfortable. But nowadays they do have a million different platforms in which they can contact via email, via cell phone. Not that I've ever had anything through social media, but there are ways you can message. And so, but establishing those ways, to begin those discussions. Hey, coach, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this. Can we meet at the end of practice? Is a lot easier than coming up in front of the entire group before practice and say, hey, coach, can I have a word after? And again, that disarming, that allowing to be approachable, and then again, fostering that communication. But back to your original question, just to summarize, I think it's important to hire good people. There has to be a good culture established above. The school district I work for is actually my alma mater. They're phenomenal. What we did there was, they have a strong culture, and it's fostered from their superintendent all the way down. And my wife is a teacher in the district. It's very easy to establish a culture when everybody's on board with that. Phenomenal AD. We have a strength and conditioning coach. So that was another element we added in right away, was meeting with our strength and conditioning coach to get the girls working hard together, supporting one another, whether it was, pushing sleds on the field or, front squatting in the locker room, understanding the injury prevention about it. Also, when we talk about the human element of it, Something that's very important for me, and I've had some serious health consequences in my life that players understand that, yeah, we're here because of football or soccer, but when you lift in a weight room, that is something you can do the rest of your life to provide a health span for you that is much more important than anything that happens on the field. When we go out and we run together, not that I do a ton of conditioning, but if they're with the coach and they're going through that, those are things that are going to help you be healthy long term. So again, establishing those habits that go beyond the soccer field, but they do it together. And something, and going back in our notes, something that really helped me with the mental health part of it is coaching, because again, when you get like, I always ask the players, before a game, and this is all the way down to academy age. Hey, what's the goal today? And a lot of them say win, and a lot of them will also say to have fun. And to me, that's the goal of every team. Like every team wants to win and every team wants to have fun, but what sets you apart is that process. And so what's helped me in coming to grips with the ups and downs of coaching is establishing a process of developing a culture, developing, lifelong relationships, understanding that there's going to be ups and downs, and how do we navigate that. A quick story for you. Our high school team made it to our district semifinals on Halloween this year. We played a late game. The game before us went into PKs. And so our game even started later. And we ended up going to PKs. We ended up losing. But in the middle of that game, it started snowing. It's a phenomenal game. We're it's a school that was, it's like a few miles down the road. Their coach and I are very close. We work together. And obviously, it's devastating to lose in PKs before going to, in Western Pennsylvania, we have something called the Whippeal, which is like a massive deal if you live around here. And, we came up short. We lost in PKs to the reigning Whippeal state champion, and this team ended up going on to win the state championship. But the girls being so upset on the bus and everything, I shared the story with them that, as that's all going on, and in my faith, like I was praying and thankful for that opportunity to guide them and to be with them, to be the person to be there with them during those downs, because I know we're going to have ups as a program as well. So you really needed to appreciate all of that. And there wasn't, and I know again, every coach will say this, but like I was so unbelievably thankful. I was heartbroken that we lost. Heartbroken. I want to win in the worst way, but to have the snow coming down while you're in double overtime on golden goal with all of these kids you've developed this relationship with, regardless of how that game went, that was such a moment I'll never forget. And being able to share that with the girls, I think helped them. Again, they're mad. And I'm sure there's things as a coach I could have done differently in that game. And there's things they could have done differently and everything else. But again, to rope it back to the experience of we're all here together for a reason to enjoy this moment. My gratitude for all of that was off the charts. And again, it goes back to, I believe the culture we created when we met with them for the first time back in February to allow them to have fun. And something that I really enjoyed through that whole process was how the girls on the bench cheered for the girls on the field. I read body language nonstop as a coach, and it is a challenge because, as you know, like you get into games where it's lose and go home, you have to determine playing time, and you're not going to make everybody happy. But if you can make everybody feel valued and a part of it, whether they're on the bench or whether they know maybe their time's a year away, maybe they're going to be in those shoes next year, and making sure we understand that and again foster that. We ended up losing that game, but I look back on how fun of an experience that was. And a funny part of that is last night I was running a session for a club team, and some of the girls on the club that I was coaching are of high school age. They played for the team that beat us. And in my penny bag, I still have the Halloween candy bag that our boosters gave us because no one could go trick-or-treating or be at home that night. So I have that bag of candy still in my bag to show them like, hey, like this is, this was like a good luck Montour. Let's see, how do we do tonight? Whatever. But as a reminder of how fun that was. And then again, to share with those girls when we see them, Like, hey, you may have beat us that night, but look at this awesome candy bag I have, as a reward. So, so back to your original question, culture is everything, and making people feel valued and a part of it, but being very clear when I meet with the parents, I am not going to make everybody happy. I tried that back when I first started coaching, and you probably have learned this as well. When you try to make everybody happy, you make nobody happy. And so you do have to be a decision maker, and you have to be decisive, and you have to own that, and not run from it. And that is something that becomes, it becomes a challenge, and it becomes where, again, back to where I said coaching is lonely, but I also hired good coaches with me that are going to tell me the truth. They're going to give me good feedback, and makes the process about growth, because you're going to learn from that as you go. So again, as I talk to you, I'm connecting even more dots of things that maybe I could have done even better, or would consider, moving forward as well.
What a great piece once again, and the way that you've taken things and put it into such a great perspective, I think is so important. And the way that you talked about comparison is the thief of joy. That was the next question that I was going to ask you, but you've breached in naturally so well. And the way that has come across, I think, represents both players and us as coaches, because sometimes I still have this, and this is a big part of the way that I think about things and every discussion that I have with someone. And currently still studying the university alongside teaching myself as well, that I'm currently doing a module, and I was talking to my tutor, and my tutor is a very experienced life coach. She does a lot of coaching and mentoring as part of her background. And when I talked to her about a few of the steps, I talked to her about the importance of comparing myself to other people, and how I see that as a step, as one that I need to take within my own personal and professional life, to make sure I've got a guide towards what I need to be doing and what I want to be doing. And therefore I can't fall behind, because I'm going to see everything around me in terms of what everyone else is doing, and therefore it needs to present an opportunity to myself to motivate myself even further, to make sure that I don't become complacent, to make sure that I don't fall behind, and therefore to be a checkpoint of what I need to do to get to where I need to be and where I should be. And within that, I know there is my own life lessons within that, because that comparison towards other people is taking away maybe some of that joy, because I'm trying to work as hard as possible to try and, what I might say is, catch up to other people, or try and put barriers or certain elements within my way that come naturally because of the way that I'm comparing myself. And therefore I know some of the joy is being stripped away from that. But in terms of how I approach and the way that I'm thinking now, joy has to be at the forefront of everything that I do. So therefore, am I putting in as much time as I was coaching as I was 6 or 7 years ago? And the answer is no. And it's not because I'm not motivated to do that anymore. It's because I've got into a different way of working. I've, that adaptability towards, right, I've done something back then 6 years ago. I know how much of my personal life I missed. How much of my personal life do I need to take back and take control of before I never see any of that? And therefore it's going to be too late within my life. And I think once you have that realization, it's so important. It's same for the players, and it's same towards you upon your journey and how that comes across, because that fun element has to be at the forefront of everything that we do. Because if you're coaching all the time and therefore you're away from your family, if you're not enjoying coaching, therefore you're only taking away time from your family, and you're not enjoying coaching. So you're shooting yourself in two different ways because of the way that you're not having the fun within the process. And that's where the processes all come down to it. That's where the fun elements, the relationships, how we must advocate for ourselves in terms of how that comes across, how that is in terms of our own happiness, because the culture might be set from the top and the culture might be in a specific way, but we might all have autonomy towards how we work with our players, how we work with our groups, how we bring things across. And therefore that's where the importance comes in, because the institution might set us up in a way to work, but unless we advocate for our own happiness, we might never actually find our own happiness, because it's taken away from us because of the constraints or framework that is in place, because that's just the natural order of things that we tend to see in organizations and the way that the working world tends to go at the moment, until it completely shifts towards that human element. So the one thing that we might see now is 4-day working weeks, for example, and that might be a change. And I know that's away from coaching a little bit, but that's towards that human element and how that might change for the coaches, how that might change for their own personal lives. Because as much as before I was setting up before this conversation, I was thinking, well, actually, when I first started coaching, I took on a group and I had no kids of my own involved. I had no relationship to that club. I had no real connections to the area, but I got involved in the club because of a contact and a relationship. And therefore, I spent 4.5 years with that club. And I was coaching kids on a Saturday morning who weren't mine, and I had no relationships or ties with. So who was getting up early on a Saturday morning? Me. Who's dealing with all the admin? Me. Who's dealing with the league, etc., and everything else that comes with it? Me. But I don't have any kids. I don't have any connection. But who's it at the benefit of? Well, it's for the benefit of the kids and the parents, realistically. But where does my real joy come from? My joy comes from coaching, being on the pitch with them, and seeing them grow as individuals. So once we advocate for ourselves, I think that's a really important point to have within that. But I like the way that you talk about establishing habits away from the soccer field. I loved how you talked about and reflected upon that piece in terms of what you would do with a team and the steps you would take. So overcoming cliques, I think, is really important, because once that seeps into an environment and that culture, it can create cracks which are so big that could actually separate the team, separate the environment from all the hard work which you're trying to instill. And therefore, other people and the players might be looking at comparisons of what other clubs and other environments might be doing, and comparing what their perception might be from the outset towards, well, actually, that's better than the one I've got. And therefore, they might try and jump ship because they think they're going to achieve more trophies or more individual success. And from my experience, when I've seen players do that, there has been times when they have, and good on them. And there's been times when players have jumped and it's hampered their success, or they've wanted to come back within a short space of time because that perception of comparison has only been detrimental to their own selves and what they've seen through social media or from what they've seen from the outset and not being involved. So I love the steps that you take. And I think it's that fostering of everyone, a fostering of happiness, which is important, and how that comes across. But in terms of those parents, that environment, that sort of perception from the outset is, when you do try to please everyone, you make no one happy. And it can be a really difficult place to be in, especially us as coaches, as leaders, as those in the middle of the park who has to have that responsibility of management. It is a really difficult sort of space to maneuver and to manage.
And you bring up the parent element is, I have faced that in my career, where that is way more challenging than the players. On the club side, parents here in the United States are paying a lot of money. And there's a certain demand where that comes about. In high school, maybe the parents were always the coaches of the team, and now they're not the paid employee of the team, and they're sitting back. They coached them through a grassroots level. And, that is, listen, I could write a book on the horror stories of how some parents treated me or talked about me or even showed up at my house. I could go on and on. But the biggest piece that I could say to any new coach or coach that is trying to overcome that is, one thing that we did early on when I was coaching high school, was we had rules. And I've always said, I don't like, and we had these rules, and there was always that gray area. There was a player tweaking it or breaking it, then you're getting questioned. And after an awful year of, we won on the field, okay, but after dealing with all the extra stuff, finally, my assistant and I, who we still work together, I said, we need to get rid of rules and we need to have standards. And we're not going to have, if you break this rule, this is what happens. But we're going to have standards that we're going to hold them to, and accountability to those standards. So after we developed the standards, we then developed the transparency with the parents. And something I do, especially at the club level, and I've recently transitioned into a new club, in a director role. And so I'm getting to some of those parents don't know me. And so I'm sort of going through it for the first time again, where, that people that may not know who I am, or maybe they know my name or my record or something along those lines, or where I came from, but they don't necessarily know how I, influence a team or use a team. The biggest thing that I just had this conversation on Wednesday night, while some teams were scrimmaging. I was able to go over to the parents and chat, and they're asking me questions, and I could tell some of them were like far-fetched rumors. And one thing I always lead with is, one, parents are allowed to contact me anytime, except for 24 hours after a game, just cool off. But you have my email, you have my cell, you can contact me. There are two things that are going to happen. I'm going to be as honest as I can be. which I'm always going to tell the parents the truth. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And you're going to get an authentic coaching experience that I provide to the players. So this is going to be very conversational. It's not going to be adversarial. And but feel free to ask away, giving some ground rules. Obviously we're not going to talk about other players on the team, things along those lines. But what I have found with every team I've played or coached is that by allowing that communication, but being clear in what that is, the questions I get are usually very, very basic. I don't get a lot of questioning, whether it be my style or what I'm asking them to do, or even down to a playing time thing. I don't even get a lot of those. Because again, I really try to establish that from the very beginning. The very first thing I lead with is, I am not going to make everybody happy here, and you need to understand that. And basically the standards of the team that need to be lived up to. And so being able to provide that avenue of communication and knowing they're going to get instant feedback from me. If a parent texts me and was like, hey, do you mind if I, have a few questions? I get back to them right away. I don't make them sit on it. I don't play like a power trip or say, well, they're delusional, I'm not going to talk to them. One thing that does help with that is I'm a parent of 3 kids with different soccer abilities. All 3 of my kids they love soccer, but they're all very different and in different environments. My youngest is a boy. The boys' environment in the United States is way different than the girls. My oldest is on a team that's in one league, and my middle one's on a team in a different league that are of varying directions. One's playing a lot going west, and the other one's going toward the mid-Atlantic. And so my experience as a parent has allowed me to be a little bit more open to parents, because before, again, back to that human element, before I had kids, it was it was more of a my way or the highway, and anybody that tested me, man, they were putting me on the spot. It was like they were drawing a line. Coach, you drew a line, what are you going to do? Because I'm stepping over it a little bit. And that was hard to sleep at night by having that kind of culture. Where now I know, all right, this game may have happened, or maybe whatever, playing time issue. Maybe a parent started. Parents love rumors, right? They love to get on their group chats and share everything that's going on. Something that it drives me nuts, but I see it all the time. Young players in the game, as soon as they get to listen back to when I was a kid, we didn't have the internet or cell phones. So if you were playing in New Jersey and had to drive 6 hours back to Pittsburgh, no one at home was getting feedback on that game until you arrived. And at that point, you probably stopped for a meal, you had a nap, mom or dad got to listen to some music and calm down. The second Johnny or Lucy gets subbed out of a game, it is instant feedback going back to somebody somewhere about how did they play? Oh my God, this person subbed in for them. Oh my God, they're not in this position. And it's like, I can feel my blood pressure's rising just thinking about let's all take a deep breath and understand that if I'm the coach, I got the best interest of this group in mind. And unfortunately, it is hard to stop the instant access to everything nowadays and the instant feedback. And even my wife and I, she goes along, she'll give me feedback on something, and then I'll watch a VO of the game later of, I'm missing my kid's game. And it is completely different the way I view things versus the way she thinks. And neither of us are wrong. It is the way we see it. But I think the bigger point of it is, there's this instant access to things nowadays. There's this instant feedback. There's this instant response that is always needed, usually emotionally involved, which is never great, but it is what it is. The one thing I can say about parents, and nothing I'm saying here is a negative comment on parents. It is the level of involvement and how much they are. I mean, parents are sacrificing so much to get their kids where they need to go, from a financial standpoint, from a time standpoint. My kids recently, we were in Spain over Christmas break. We were in London for a day and then went to Spain, and my kids loved it. And they were like, "Dad, when can we go back?" And I was like, "If all three of you quit club soccer, we could play. We could go 3 times a year." Um, it's a financial investment, and you do give up a lot. So I try to, again, understanding that human element of the parents, understanding, I was coaching high school basketball, and a dad in the parking lot. I was an assistant coach, and a dad in the parking lot after just berated me. And I had both my daughters with me, and we quietly ignored him. We got in the car, and they were like, "Dad, why is he so mad at you? Why is he so mad at you? Dad, I think he wanted to hurt you." And I was like, I, and they were like, and I was just like, "Listen, girls, he's not mad at me. He's mad at the situation, and that is his frustration." And they're like, "But Dad, you seem really mad too." And I was like, "Well, if you guys weren't here, I don't know what would have happened." Because it was pretty confrontational. But again, that element of emotions that come out in sports, um, and people usually will step it back a little bit, as you walk away from games and stuff like that. And that's why, again, instant feedback, as much as I can field a call, have a chat with a parent, understand that we're all part of the same process here, is crucial to, again, developing that culture. Now, again, on that phone call, I can't promise. I make no promises. I make that very clear, because you break a promise, now you lose trust, and then there goes the culture of a program. So I probably said a million things in that little bit, but yeah, like the cultural part of this, is honestly everything. And understanding the ups and downs that come with it. Having a great culture does not mean everyone is going to be super successful and happy, but we will all learn and grow from it and be able to be our best selves if it was all established correctly.
Our best selves. I love that little point that you have there, and in terms of being our best selves, and the culture doesn't establish that. And I think that's so true as well in terms of how that comes across, because people think that a culture is instilled and therefore it's going to tick all the boxes, and they're going to see every bit piece of happiness that they want to see. So, as part of the institution and organization in terms of the school that I work at, we're currently going through an organizational shift right now in terms of our culture. So we've had a current restructure, we've had a new head teacher come in, and therefore our senior leadership has changed, our processes have changed. So for me as an outsider, when I first started my job, I was at the right time because those changes were coming into place. But I was an outsider anyway, and therefore I wanted to bring in new ideas which perhaps weren't in play. So once everyone else has started to adapt and come into play, it's become a really important place to be in terms of whether you're adapting with the times or whether you're not going to adapt with them, and the difference that's going to have. And therefore people are seeing this culture shift, this culture change, and expecting immediate results already. And therefore when they're not seeing those immediate results, they're trying to therefore pin the accountability on the head teacher or the senior leadership team, and they're not in a position where they're ready to adapt or adjust to it. And it's going to take a 5-6 years until we see the real outcomes of the foundations that the head teacher and senior leadership are putting in now. And this culture change which they're adapting is part of what has been left before them and when they were even in charge. So they've had to adapt to what was already left, they've had to adapt to the current situation, and they've already had a restructuring change because of what was needed. And therefore that's brought its own elements of different needs in terms of that. So they have three different fronts which they're sort of fighting on to try and bring this together holistically. But it's how those people come on board and have to understand that culture is going to take that time to shift, and it is going to change. So even though you started your new role as that director, you might see a different culture in 3-4 years time because you've been able to embed the foundations, and therefore that communication style and how that comes across is going to be very important. How that comes across in terms of all the coaches and what they do is going to be very important. How the parents understand the identity of the current program, and the program that is going to shift over that period of time. So as that comes into play, that is going to be important, and how that culture shift is important, but it doesn't provide instant results as well. But back to the very initial part of that piece which you had in play, getting rid of rules and instilling standards, I think is very important, because when I first started or was younger and 14, 15, 16 myself, and I had the horizon of being a teacher and thought I want to be a teacher when I'm older, etc. Part of that was I want a lot of routine. I want a lot of expectations. I need a lot of rules in terms of my classroom. And now over that period of time, and I have been a teacher for a substantial amount of time, and I've had different experiences, and I've done coaching, and I've been able to piece this all together. I don't have a lot of rules, so I've got more expectation and standards in terms of how that comes across, and therefore that facilitation is an important piece. And sometimes people might go, actually, you facilitate too much, and as a facilitator, you might have bad behaviors, might have negative behaviors, etc., and all of that. And I'm like, well, actually, no, I actually see less negative behaviors because of the way that I am compared to some of the teachers who have a lot of rules and expectations in their classroom. So they might be very big on rules, 1, 2, bang, therefore you're warning, and they follow a behavior system. Whereas I'm like, well, actually, I can facilitate this, and therefore my expectations are going to, therefore, once I address a situation with a young person, they're going to understand that's not what I expect of them, and therefore their behavior will change and their engagement will improve. And therefore, I see less negative behaviors in my classroom compared to others. So that culture shift is a really important piece, especially if you are getting rid of rules and looking at standards, because you might have a CPD, or you might spend a period of time delivering a workshop, and you might say this to other coaches, etc., and people might be listening now even, and a part of that, they might go, how can you get rid of rules? You need expectations, you need standards, and all of this. And therefore, they might not see how that is going to shift and change over a period of time. And therefore, it comes back to that adaptability piece and how it may play in. And they might also have that comparison of joy piece as well, because they might compare their program to your program and be like, well, actually, I got rid of all the rules, and therefore it's not working as well as Alex's. Well, Alex's is instilled 2-3 years before this. You've tried to instill it over 2-3 months, and therefore you're not seeing the results that you need. So therefore, you're trying to compare it to something which has got a long standing and therefore is in a very different period to you. And it's about how you get to that period, which is really important, how that shifts over time. So you can't expect or see instant results. It's going to take that time to come into play. And that is something which you're doing in terms of that director role and how that really comes across. So for other coaches, it's, if you're going to try something, don't expect instant results. It is going to take that time to shift and adapt to it. And therefore you have to have a framework or a mindset which is going to put you in a place which allows that. So these pieces are really important for every coach, every individual listening, because it is going to take time, and that's where the importance really comes down to.
Yeah, and again, it's an evolution. It's you know, like one of the another quote is similar to be aware of someone that says, well, that's the way we always done it here. That is a disastrous quote for anybody that's trying to progress and have growth. So again, I think the piece of that though is doing what works for me and who fits me as the individual that I am and what I'm comfortable with, but also educating myself, going back to surrounding myself with people that aren't always the same as me, having people with a different opinion, and there's way too much polarization, especially in the United States. If you follow anything political, the polarization of topics, opposed versus unopposed. Something I'm really into right now is I love this idea of relationism. But everything you see is relationism versus positionism. Like you have to choose a side, and it's what's wrong with elements of all of it that work, that fit into like you said, your framework. So yeah, again, the educational piece and that growth piece, and then trying something is important. I think though, if I was listening to this for the first time and trying to wrap my brain around all of it, I might be like, well, it just feels like you sort of been all over the place, or this sort of all came together. But a lot of it again starts with within that education. There's a lot of people that came before us that have established a lot that is like non-negotiables. This has to be a part of what we do. And I think when you start with those non-negotiables, what is all going to be around, and this is what I know, this is what I believe in, this is my belief system. Some people, whether it's a company, they have like core values. Everything is around our core values, or a mission statement. We start with this mission statement, and I can't begin to tell you that I've spent a lot of time doing stuff like that. But it's cultural things like that that sort of allow the framework to be set, rather than like you said, Luca, if I was going to a new team today, well, if it was a brand new coach with no framework, no administrative support, or maybe bad culture from above, or hey, here you go, you're on your own, go figure it out. you can give it as much time as you want, but it's going to take a lot of time to figure those things out with no education, no administrative support, or director support, or again, a toxic environment where, again, if you're not the leader, that everything falls under you. That's a big challenge. And so identifying those situations are also important. Again, if I'm talking to a new coach, looking for those sorts of things to put yourself in a good position with people that have a growth mindset, that want the best for everybody, that are willing to get in and help you out, that are going to check in on you, that are gonna in my director role now, I chat with the lead director numerous times a day, every single day, and the other people that are involved. It is constant communication. My assistant coaches and our strength and conditioning coach, our school principal, I talk all the time to them. If I needed to talk to the superintendent, he would pick up the phone right now. So having those strong relationships built in, having a strong framework, and then that education piece on your own, that's the part that I've done a lot of on my own. For me, I think that what gets me going and what I find excitement in is if there was one thing I'd have put my finger on that I love, is that educational piece. Learning about something new and then trying it is what probably fuels me every single day. Being a math teacher, because there's that problem solving element to all of it. Many years ago, my last year, I coached boys high school for 12 years. My last year, we were ranked number 1 in the season. And our very first game was a school that I teach at, and we could never beat them, but we were certain we're crushing them this year, and we're going all the way through to the championship. And they beat us 2-0. And honestly, it wasn't even much of a game. I mean, they had a plan and they beat us. And I was like, man, I am a failure again. And it was funny. We get off the bus, and we were coming off a very successful season. And the players were like, hey, coach, can we talk? They're like, hey, we think you're trying to do everything we did with last year's team. And it worked for them because they were way more athletic than us. But this year, I think we're a better soccer team. So maybe we need to adjust our tactics a little bit. And these were good kids. We did have a good culture surrounding it. And my assistant was like, come on, you're falling apart after one loss. Come on, guys. That loss doesn't even matter, And I was like, hey, let's hear him out. I said, listen, guys, I hear you. Let me sleep on it. And let's come back. Well, we're training the next day or whenever we train again, and let's figure it out. And I got home and I woke up at 2 a.m. and I thought, okay, that makes sense what they're saying. But I had to be comfortable doing it too, because if I just listen to the players, now I'm not facilitating anymore. I've lost control. I'm letting them sort of sail the ship, and came up with a plan that I was comfortable with, that I thought they could buy into. Long story short, we didn't lose much more that year, and made history, winning titles and everything else. And it was I always go back to getting off that bus where the players were comfortable enough to approach us and say, hey, you want to run this high press system, coach, and we don't have the legs for it, but man, we can knock the ball around. If we let the other team sort of have it a little bit and we win it, and then we can exploit them that way. And I was like, okay. I always go back to that, because if I would have been a tough guy or been a my way or the highway kind of guy, we would have never been as successful as we were that year to win titles for the school they never won before. And I appreciated that those players, we had the culture that was established, and it wasn't established right then and there. It was when those players were seniors, they were freshmen and came in, and we garnered trust together to have those conversations, which was awesome for us. And to have that experience of, I've never felt so down after a loss than that loss. And then to have players sort of question it in a very respectful manner was like, man, I'm getting kicked twice here. But then I was like, you know what? There's something here. And and I learned a ton from that. And obviously the results came, but more so from, again, a culture standard aspect was a big learning experience for me.
And within that, some people might see that as you've shifted your principles, you've shifted your standards to adapt to another team. And some people might go, actually, you can't shift your standards or your principles, because that's only going to make you a bad coach. Or the most successful coaches don't negotiate their standards and their principles; they're always in place. However, you're not doing that. You're keeping your standards, your principles. You're just shifting the narrative. You're shifting the environment because you've had a very different team in place, and therefore the team which you've got now is very different to the team that you've had before. And we've seen this in very successful teams whereby they still have the same principles and maybe systems of play, but they've adapted the roles within that, and those roles have adapted technically on the pitch and how those players play, but how that management comes into it, and that therefore comes that human element as well, because your team is going to be very different, and therefore your expectations, those learning curves, those reactions, those responses from your players will be very different to those as you've seen before. So the way that you delivered training sessions last year might have been very different to the way you do it this year. And people might go, actually, why is he not doing that the same as last year? Well, actually, the group is very different. So therefore, the way that they're going to learn is perhaps this group is a lot more auditory than this group last year, who were very more hands-on in terms of their learning and wanting to be straight into it. Or this group actually learns visually, so therefore we've got to do a lot of workshops around that psychological element because they're lacking the game intelligence which goes behind that, and therefore that lack of game intelligence can have impact on that technical ability, the shape of the team, how they respond, how those systems are in play, and therefore how that all pieces together is very, very important. So how that looks off the field is an important narrative, but how that team from one year to the next is also very important. So where you've seen that shift and you're beating a team now whereas you wasn't before, it does show the way that you're managing the team is very different, and therefore those outcomes have been responsive to the culture, but you're starting to see those positive outcomes as a result on the field as well now, in terms of that wider impact of the players that you have been having.
Yeah, it's with high school too, it's a challenge because you're not selecting those players. They live in the school district, and that's who you have year after year. But with club, and even in Pittsburgh, I mean, you're not going out and picking who you want. You know, it's a tryout process, and you still have to, you still got to, you're going to take, the players available that are available. So it is an adaptation. Something that really helped me as a coach with those sorts of things and developing, like you said, he's changing his standards or principles and things like that. As far as like behaviors go, those were what the standards were, like the behaviors of the team, and how you show up to a game and how you represent the team and things like that. That's what was a lot of in our standards, and then the communication being respectful in your communication. But it really, nothing was very soccer specific. But to the educational piece, something that was massive to me, and I've studied Doug Lemov in the Teacher's Guide to Coaching, which came way of doing the Tovo Todd Bean's course, the Tovo methodology. I did the module online version 1. That is when I first started hearing about what a game model is and principles of play. And again, to anyone that was getting into coaching, it is so easy for me now to analyze a game, to create training sessions based on Doug Lemov's work and Todd Bean's work, because like I said, there's been a lot of smart people that came before us. I'm not going to get my notepad out and say, here are Alex Hobbs's principles of play, and now all of a sudden I'm going to be Pep Guardiola or De Zerbi or someone like that. I'm going to go, I'm not going to be dumb. I'm going to go with those that have a proven methodology that is generic enough to tailor to my environment. And I will speak about Tovo and what Todd Bean's work has done for me as a coach till I'm blue in the face, because it is rooted in science and pedagogy. It is the smartest way for me to incorporate the sessions that I want to incorporate and teach what I want to teach. But to your point, I could teach a team to sit back in a low block as well as a high press. I could teach a team that wants to play more direct. I could teach a team that wants to knock the ball around and have tremendous build out shape, but I'm going to be focused on those principles of play as I go. And so any new coach that's coming in, and I'm working with my new club, working with them on a framework and a game model. I've done some Google searches on trying to find other big clubs throughout the country and overseas on what their game models look like and their principles of play. And they're all very similar. They have age group breakdowns and skills or objectives or learning objectives that need to be met prior to leaving this age group and things along those lines. And like I said, that from a game standpoint, those are so clear and easy for me to follow and understand. Those are the benchmarks I need to meet if I'm working with a U11, 12 player versus, a U18 player. But again, coming back to those frameworks, so having sort of behavioral standards in a framework within that culture, and then on the coaching side, having those principles of play within your game model. I've never felt more confident than ever to establish a training environment that matches a game environment than I ever have in my life. And again, I say that humbly because I could have a conversation with someone soon that could change my mindset a little bit on it. But I do know that I'm always going to come back to those principles of play. The game model may change a little bit, but those principles of play of how to, organizing your defense or whatever it may be are always going to be what I structure around. For instance, if you connect it to, if you want to go build muscle, you could think of a million ways to do it, but there's probably only a few ways that are truly going to be the most effective way to build muscle in a certain amount of time. Same thing with losing weight. There are probably a bunch of different ways, but there's going to be an optimal way to do it in a certain amount of time that you want to achieve it. And so it's understanding what those models are to implement. And so, again, that educational piece, like I said, that's one of my favorite things to continue to read and do. As I plan, get more involved and talk to other coaches, and you see so many different ways of doing it. One hard thing that I have had or struggled with is now being so invested, seeing other coaches go about it in a very archaic way. I think if there's one thing that frustrates me more than ever, it is those things. Hey, you're standing at you five are standing at this cone and they're standing at that cone, and they're just knocking the ball back and forth. Or okay, you make this run and now it's done. They're missing transition elements and all what we could go on and on. But I think if there's one thing I hope to influence more and more by conversations like this, the on-field actual application and coaching of the game, is to really progress the game from where it is. Something that's big to me as well is in the United States, we love athletes, and it's all about athletes, and we're going to have athletic soccer players. And it's just like, is that just because it's the easy way to get results? Or do we want to spend our time developing intelligent players? You may not get the wins at a young age, but developing that intelligence is going to allow those players individually and as a team to excel at a higher level down the road. And so this might be a part 2 of a podcast talking about intelligence, but the athlete versus intelligent part, I always want, like, of course I'm going to work with whatever athlete we have, but developing that intelligent part is, and again, that comes from the education part of the game. When your education fails and we're driving balls over top to the fast kid to score goals, that may make everybody feel good to move up, a rung in the standings. But as far as, I feel like you're selling everybody short in the program when we start doing things like that. Probably a tangent that I went off there, but as we're chatting, it's something that came to mind.
No, I think it's great, and I love the way that you put that as well in terms of adapting that game model and how that's going to look. But I like that you talk about the cultural shift as well, because a lot of the coaches that I do speak to are very very much based in the USA, and therefore I hear a lot about Tovo, I hear a lot about Todd Bean, I hear a lot about how players have to be very athletic. So someone who's recently been on, Ashley Cordero, is the recent episode that's out, and part of hers is that she's come from Scotland to live in the USA, so therefore she has a narrative between what we do in the UK compared to the USA, and her husband's Brazilian, so therefore she's got 3 different ways of thinking. Now, for some people, some might say that's actually conflicting because she's trying to think in three different ways and how that comes across. But in previous episodes, it's been covered that it is important to understand that you can have different ways, but it's not just by going take this piece, take this piece, take this piece. You have to be very educational in terms of how you do that and how that plays in, because that will establish your program. And there's nothing wrong in taking those parts away, but as long as you're thinking it through and that you've got a very strong structure behind it, it's going to then piece together. Therefore, it becomes natural, and therefore it's your model. And then once you've got that model, it's in place for you to adapt, for you to tweak how you might adjust something. So your technical piece might be very different. So that is the cultural difference and shape which comes into it. There's nothing wrong in taking bits away from other game models and piecing it to your own. And therefore, that is then your own model. So you're not trying to reshape something entirely or be the next Guardiola, etc. But actually, what you have done is you've created the Alex Hobbs way of doing things, because that's the way your game model has been established. And therefore, you're doing things which are adjusted towards your team, your program, etc. And I like how that really comes across and the way that adaptability piece comes, because as you talk there about players being very athletic, I think as the four pillars are in play, yours sort of sit between technical and psychological. And that's for me a big focus in terms of everything that I do as coaching, is that I do a lot of workshops off the pitch for my players, because I'm very big on psychological. I'm very big on that technical piece, and their fitness will come over time. And I don't have the biggest focus in my mind. I'm not a sports scientist. I'm not a strength and conditioning coach. I've got some elements where I understand it, but they're not my areas of expertise. So therefore, if I want my players to become athletic and more fit and have those sort of sports science elements behind it, then I kind of have the right professionals for them to approach and put that in place for me. But actually, what it comes down to is the psychological piece and technical piece, which is very, very important. And I think no matter what program or where they go in life, as long as they got that technical piece and that psychological, that's the best pieces you can give a player, especially for us as grassroots, as club coaches, high school coaches, to really instill in players, because then they can start to adapt, they can become fitter over time, they can work in different programs, and therefore those specialists at other levels are actually going to support the players in doing that. So for us at foundation levels and what we do, I think those pieces are very, very important. But I like the way that you talk about the non-negotiables. I like the way that you put that game model into place, because that adaptability towards that game model and the way that you tweak things is important, because some people, especially at a grassroots level or club, might try to overthink and go, I have to change the session every week. I have to change my program continuously. Well, actually, if you've got a model and you can just adapt it to each different team, and that's all that I've ever done as a coach. And I think that's where your growth comes in. You're just adjusting to the pitch, which is in front of you, or you're adjusting to the system, which is implemented, and adjusting to that group. But that model you can tweak in terms of those training sessions and how you might just adapt them, how that goes into play. And therefore, if you're becoming very unsuccessful over time, and therefore you're finding a place where you're perhaps not winning as much, and therefore you're not getting that joy, you're not getting that fun out of it, that just means that you have to learn and maybe inherit a new game model which is adaptive to the modern era. But to have a game model in place and then just make those tweaks week upon week or to your team, I think it's very important. You don't have to have, say, manage 4 teams and 4 different game models. You might have one game model across all of them, and the way you coach them might be very different. So it's what works for each coach, the way that you found that it works for you, the way that it works for me. And that's where the real art of coaching, that joy and that fun comes from it. And I think that's what pieces together that educational side. But the way that you talk about that game changing, that intelligence, that education piece, that game model as a possible part 2 is definitely on the cards if you want to do that. But in terms of how that comes across and the way that has shaped the entire episode, for me, you've shown an absolute growth towards where you started at 18, how that's come across over a period of time, that culture shift and that narrative, that education, how you've adapted between teacher and coach, the way that you've taken that across from dictating what you wanted on the pitch to how that comes across in terms of facilitation, how that psychological piece fits into play, maybe changing from that athletic side and strands, questioning, culture change, relationship with parents, communications, standards, expectations, changing frameworks, moving away from rules, that accountability. So there's so much within this where people might go, whereas you alluded to earlier, where people might be going, oh, you're jumping from this to this. Well, actually, I think you've created a very great narrative right throughout, which actually pieces together towards your own growth as a coach, towards what your philosophy looks like, towards how it's going to look like in the future. And that continuous piece, which has allowed us to really take that journey to cover all the pieces which we've really talked about. So we've looked at coaches, mentors, and environments. We've looked at education, experience upon experience, both as a coach and for a player, values, principles, and beliefs. We've looked at mindset, mentality, the process within that. We've looked at what that belief looks like and how that faith comes in, transparency, vulnerability, barriers, authenticity, creativity, and how to really keep it simple in that game model. So within this entire episode, I think the absolute outcomes that we've had have been truly amazing, and especially the way that you pieced all these together and the timestamps that I've got on them in terms of how these pieces come across. I think you've done an amazing job, Alex. So I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on. I as you can tell, I can talk. I enjoy talking and sharing all of this stuff. Super passionate about it. So it's always fun to have these discussions.
Absolutely, likewise. And well, with every coach that I have on, I do a quick fire round if you'd like to take part in that.
Absolutely, sounds good. Now I'm a little nervous now. I haven't prepared for this.
No, you'd be fine. There's nothing to catch you off guard, I promise.
Okay, cool. Sounds good.
What team do you support?
Manchester United. I've actually had this conversation recently. If I woke up from today and had to choose, I'd probably be more of a Liverpool guy. And I know that sounds crazy, but I love the way Liverpool plays. I love Jurgen Klopp. But when I was a kid, I fell in love with Eric Cantona. They were the only team that was on TV on Sunday mornings. I get home from church and put on ESPN Tonight, and Man U was always on. So that was sort of the only team I knew. There was no internet or anything else. So I didn't know any other team existed. So I've always been a Man U supporter. Fell in love with David Beckham and Scholes, Nicky Butt, Old Gunnar Solskjaer. So I've always fallen in love with them. As much as I'm a Man U fan, though, I just like good football. So I don't hate anybody but Arsenal. But that's a long story.
No, I completely get that. I was out with my best mate the other day. We were watching a Wales game, and the barmaid behind the bar was talking to us, and she was trying to understand how long was left in the game, etc. And we got talking to her, and we asked her what team she supported. She said West Ham, and I said to her, "This is my best mate. He supports Liverpool, but he's actually been to see Man City more in the last 2 years than he's ever seen Liverpool." So I completely understand that narrative entirely.
If I could tell you a quick funny story, I'm a Man U fan. My son is a Man City fan, just like any young kid is, because they're dominant at this point. My middle one, she was a Newcastle turned Man U fan, and then my oldest was a Chelsea fan because of Christian Pulisic. My wife loved Brentford because their coach had great hair. So that was one of the funny ones, and we tried to see Brentford when we were overseas, but didn't work out.
Hey, I love that though. Sometimes it just takes someone to influence you to support something.
For sure.
Who was or is your role model, both as a football coach or a person?
I mentioned Todd Bean, but I think the influence of Johan Cruyff on all of that. What I've always, when I first started teaching and being an athlete myself, playing basketball and seeing the crossover between all goal attacking sports or invasion sports, whatever you want to call it. Johan Cruyff always had a model of, of intelligence, and he didn't become good because he went to training 3 times a week. He was good because of all the time he put in outside of training. And I love his perspective on all of that. And his autobiography, My Turn, is fantastic. It's an autobiography, but it's a coach book. I mean, it's fantastic. So I'd have to say Johan Cruyff from a coaching influence, and from a personal influence, my wife and my parents. They directly hold me accountable for everything. I wouldn't be who I am without them. So they drive everything. And my wife being my biggest supporter ever. There's been numerous times where I've wanted to walk away from certain coaching situations and things like that, or was encouraged to take on a new role because of other things going on. I will say this. I'll always say she's wrong, but she's usually always right. So my wife has been a massive influence on my life. We met when I was 16. So we've been together a long time.
I really love that. And I love the fact that you've got that childhood sort of relationship and the way that it's all come together for you, being married, being supportive of each other, understanding the deeper understanding of when you're going through something and perhaps wanting to walk away from coaching, the 3 kids that you have together. So, always a big fan of things like that. So, and especially when it comes to your family as well and what you've taken away from a younger age and how that all still fits into those pieces together, I think is really important. Who is the best player of all time?
I got to go with Messi. I think he has all the natural skill and gifts. You watch what, even at his age, what he did in that last World Cup was unbelievable. I know people, students will argue. I mean, kids today love to talk about Messi versus Ronaldo. I think Ronaldo is one of the hardest working athletes ever. But Messi, when you hear the best of the best say Messi, 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 I cannot argue with the Arsene Wengers of the world and the Peps and the Klopps and you name it. They're talking about Messi. So I got to go with Messi.
And I think if they've managed him or managed against him or seen him firsthand and they're the ones making that decision, you can't really argue against it sat from, where we see it. So, their perspective sort of wins on that front, I believe. If you could move to any country to coach or to move to any country in the world, where would it be?
I love the United States. I love where I'm at in Pittsburgh. It's one of my favorite places. I mean, Pittsburgh, I've visited so many other places. I absolutely love Pittsburgh. But if I had to move, we just spent a week with good friends. We actually hosted a couple from Spain, good friends, Arsenio and Grace. Arsenio just started working with Atletico Madrid. They came and stayed with us, and we created friendships. So we stayed with them in a small area called Villacanejos in Spain. We visited some different places, but if I had to go, I would go near. I'd go near Madrid. There was a city, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Aranjuez, I believe is the pronunciation of the city. It was gorgeous. It was laid back. It still had a city feel, but it wasn't massive. It was gorgeous. Soccer everywhere. So I think my wife and I, we agreed there. Now, if I stay in the United States, I'm probably going coastal somewhere. I'm probably going, I'm going to the shore. I'm probably going Charleston, South Carolina, which is absolutely gorgeous. But that would be to retire and not do any work. So, if I'm not working another day, I'm going to the beach. If I'm staying within soccer and teaching, I'm probably going over to Spain.
Good choices. I love those ones, definitely. If you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Say that again.
If you had to have someone describe you in 3 words, what 3 words would they be?
Oh, man, it depends on who you ask. I think genuine, funny, and busy. I think busy would be the third one because always up to something. So I think those would be 3 words.
Good choices. If you could be remembered for anything at the end of your coaching career or when you decide to step away, what would you like to be remembered for?
That I really cared. One thing in teaching and in coaching, if parents truly knew how much I'm up at night thinking about their kids and their kids' issues, not even soccer related, but how much I think about other people and how to problem solve for them would be something that would be meaningful to me. My wife, being an educator, is the same way, and we have countless nights where we're up, and it's not about our own kids. It's not about ourselves ever. Most of my happiness truly never comes down to anything I've ever achieved, and I really, I've won enough games and done some firsts in program histories and things along those lines, and all of it is sort of empty to me. It really only. The only thing that ever really feels good is knowing that I made somebody else feel good. And that is what means the most to me. And if people knew how much, not just myself, but just, coaches in general, I'm never up at night thinking about how can I win this game or how can I do this or what can I do to better influence myself or move myself forward or my family forward. It's truly about other people all the time. And honest to God, it is so taxing sometimes because as a solution-oriented person, some of these solutions don't come by in a month, or I'm sorry, in a day or a week or a month. I journal consistently, and it's funny when I go back into 2 years ago, the things I was worried about and the people that were in my life and that I was worried about in helping, or even again thinking about what they're thinking about to help them, not even knowing what they're thinking about, is sort of, you know, how I've led my life. And it's tough sometimes, but it is sort of who I am, I guess.
I really love that, and I love the way that you piece that together again, and how you sort of bring that across and put that into perspective, which I think has such a nice feel to it, especially when you sat listening on the opposite side, which it does have a nice feeling towards it. If you could spend a day with any coach or manager, who would it be?
Ooh. I'd probably say Jurgen Klopp. He speaks good enough English, so that helps me. Um, you know, it yeah, Jurgen Klopp, Jose Mourinho would be another fun one. I think he'd be a good time. Trying to think of an American coach. I honestly like Greg Berhalter would be another one. Just knowing everything he has to go through, coaching a U.S. side that on a world scale is not where everyone here in the United States think they should be, and that is not an easy management position. So I would love to chat with him. I'd love to chat with um, Jill Ellis, the old U.S. women's coach. I mean, to win, I think 2 titles, um, and to know to always be on the forefront socially and athletically, would be a really good conversation as well. So those are just a few, I think.
Good choices, definitely some good ones in there for sure. But if you were in that position now, like Xavi Alonso, whereby you're in a great position where you are now, but you've got, say, the US national team, which have approached you about their job, about replacing, United have come in about replacing their manager, or you've got Liverpool for an outgoing manager, so we're essentially replacing all three. Which job would you take if you had all three on the line in front of you now?
Well, I think I just read he's staying at Bayern, but Bayern Leverkusen. But um, with Klopp, it's hard. It's hard to replace. It's hard to replace a legend, and everything he's done at Liverpool. So that's challenging. It is hard to go into Man U, which I don't know if it matters who their manager is. I think that is a massive overhaul of the entire program and culture, from everything anybody says. And I think Ten Hag is brilliant. I just think that that's a tough situation with a lot of money spent. The U.S. would be extremely exciting, I think. And I got to be honest, I don't know much about international soccer. I think there are some really big challenges, but what would be really cool for someone like him to come in and change the scouting process, fight the politics of the MLS academies, and talent identification, creating bigger centers of talent identification, not just the major MLS academies, having more geographical sense for kids, more money instilled into the programs to find, right now, if you're not a well-to-do family, it's hard to make it, or at least be identified. Or if you are in a rural area with not much around, or without education. So I think knowing all of that, if he came in to the United States, it would be a very fun project. I think Klinsmann, I really like Klinsmann, and I thought that he got a bad deal, but you need that I think the international experience, to bring here where the growth is massive. Something I didn't tell you, but like I walk every day at school, and where I teach, there are more kids playing soccer on the playground now than playing football or basketball, which culturally is a massive shift, for us as a country. So to see more of that is pretty inspiring.
I think I've just touched upon bits of those conversations before, whereby I've spoken to coaches from the US, and when I've said about it's fantastic that US have so many national sports in terms of basketball, American football, then they've got hockey, and then baseball within that. So you've got four major ones which are typically recognised for the US, and then to have soccer coming up and joining that as a recognised national program as well, and maybe to be changing that narrative, as you say there, for it to be a shift in terms of how many players are playing that compared to more of a traditional national sport is very interesting how that comes together as well. So we're very similar here in Wales, whereby we're trying to get more players into football, and then our national sports have been recognised to be rugby and football. But it's going to be interesting to see whether football overtakes rugby, and how essentially it has, because we have more grassroots players than rugby, and the game is starting to become a little bit bigger than the rugby here. So it's going to be interesting to see. But in terms of how that looks nationally across the US, I think what you say there about having more centres and creating more opportunities, I think is essential in terms of, especially how big the US is and how many states you have, the amount of individuals which are available. You could be a leading nation, because, you know, when you look at France and the 4 possible squads that they could present in terms of their next upcoming international tournament, the US could be in the exact same position where they have so much depth of quality that they should be having that, because they're the biggest nation competing out of all the other nations in these tournaments, for example. So I think the US could be leading world football in 10 to 15 years' time.
Yes, I agree. The growth is crazy. The growth is crazy. And I think education, more people, I've always said this, when you are in South America, you're in Europe, in different parts of the world, probably even into Africa, like when you have grandparents and uncles and everybody that are coming around the family dinner and they're talking about their soccer or football experience. Here in the United States, we're talking about American football or baseball, but I think that's going to change. And then again, the family influence on the players, it will be what you will see. And I think that's when it starts to become a bigger family conversation in each individual household, is when it becomes the cultural norm within the United States.
I think that shift is coming, and someone from the outside, I think I've definitely seen it so far, and I think the way that is going to continue going is going to be fascinating to see for sure. What are your 3 non-negotiables then?
3 non-negotiables as a coach. 2 things I start with right away at an academy age are attitude and effort. Are crazy huge, is attitude and effort. And then the third is understanding. So having understanding of why we're doing what we do, and understanding the methods in which we're doing it. Those 3 things, it's going to be hard to be anything else. I mean, that is, if you have a good understanding and everybody has a solid attitude and their effort is spot on, you're going to have a successful program. So I think those 3 things are exactly what it needs to be. And again, that's when I see someone's attitude waver, if I see someone negatively questioning what we do, that's when we'll have those conversations. Like I say it in my math classroom all the time. Students can't do geometric proofs and they have a bad attitude about it. And I always ask the question, I was like, has anybody ever done anything well with a bad attitude? It is hard to be successful with a bad attitude. I mean, it's very hard. So those things I keep in mind when coaching a team: attitude, effort, and understanding.
I love that question there in terms of what you say. Has anyone ever been successful with a bad attitude? I've really loved that, and the way that you asked that question as well, which does bring a narrative and brings a level of thinking behind that. If you had to recommend one book, what would it be?
One book. Something that completely changed my coaching. I had a team that was everyone kept telling me it was super talented, and ultimately we failed, and I felt so responsible for it, to the point where I just wanted to leave coaching. I thought maybe coaching isn't for me. I fell into a book by Daniel Coyle called The Talent Code, and basically in that book, he discusses talent hotbeds in the world, whether that's through soccer in Brazil or music, or different areas that are producing massive amounts of talent and per quota, but it doesn't make sense based on the numbers that they have. And then basically it's a deep dive into those talent. And in that book, he discusses for there truly to be a talented team, there needs to be exceptional coaching, exceptional players, and exceptional parents, as well as other things. And that stuck with me, and it influenced and changed everything I did in coaching, to the point when we won our first district title as a coach. I emailed Daniel and I was like, hey, just so you know, 4 years ago, I bought your book and it completely changed my coaching. We just won the first title in school history. And I just want to thank you. I'd never met him. I'd never mentioned it or talked to him. He responded back with just a thank you. And 2 years ago, he came out with the culture code. And before that even came out. I got an advanced copy in the mail, unsolicited, completely forgot I even had mentioned it to him, with a nice note and that initial. I mean, it wasn't even published or in stores yet. It was a paperback of what that book was and the workbook that goes with it. So I'll never forget that book. Completely influenced the way I looked at talent. Talent isn't showing up and being good at something. It is the little points of emphasis a coach can say with very little words, but are very meaningful to influence that. And then having the supporting parameters around it, like parents and a culture that surrounds it to really make. And again, there's a big part in that book about Brazilian soccer, how there's so many world-class soccer players coming out of these small, poor areas in Brazil. And what is it that makes them special comparative to, say, the United States, where there's just as many, if not more, soccer players. So why are they getting world-class talent? Talks about musicians in there. And again, I forget the school, but there's a particular place that are producing world-class musicians, and it's one teacher. And anyone that goes to them is all of a sudden, with these little coaching points or teaching points, becoming world-class. So the book was crazy influential for my development as a coach.
It's definitely a good book, and I think, as you say it there, I think if you're not sold anyone on it listening, I think they definitely should have been sold on it at that time, because it definitely does cover so much in a way that I was going to say about these little pockets in America, which is what we've alluded to previously, because there is so much talent in terms of what is available and where that's going to go. So it's about how you unlock that, and you don't overlook that talent. I think that comes in terms of your culture and the way that you coach as well, because we see so many players churned out who should be at certain levels who never make it to those levels. I think that comes down to the deeper dives of coaching, which is really important and really reflects upon the work that they do. And what does reflection mean to you?
It is so I actually have it written down here. So when I win, I always talk about winning the process. The results will take care of themselves if I win the process. And the first thing is to plan accordingly, then execute on the plan, and then reflect. So constantly thinking about how things went and not being judgmental about it, but how do we make it better? What worked? What was soaked in? What were the dynamics of that situation? And then, iterating from there. Everything's an iterative process. So as soon as I try something, how do I make it a little bit better? How do I increase the ability to do that? How do I expand on that? How do I, maybe it worked really well for small numbers. How does it work now for bigger numbers? How does that work in the bigger model of what we do? So reflection is something that we do. I journal a ton. And a lot of times I'll journal without reading any past things. I'll journal just thoughts, getting thoughts down. But a lot of times too, I'll go back to old passages, like I said before, and reflect on how was I feeling in that moment, or what were the issues that I was facing in that moment. So a constant reflection on not just, whether it be my emotions or my planning state of a training session or whatever, is happening personally, but reflection is paramount in everything we do in the growth process. Because if you don't reflect, you're just going to go back to what I said before. That's the way we always have done it here. And that to me is a recipe for stalling out in anything you do.
That's such a great way to put reflection. I love the way that you shape that, and how that really comes across for how individuals should look at what reflection is, and certain components which can really field in that view of what reflection could be and how they could further their scope towards what it could look like if they were to adapt that mindset, as we've discussed right throughout the podcast. And the final one is, what do you enjoy most about coaching?
To me, coaching, especially soccer and basketball, this may sound bizarre, but I'm going to try to give you a more creative response than anything else. What I absolutely love between the two sports, and soccer more so than ever now because I don't coach as much basketball, is when you get it all right, the fluidity and the poetry within the game that is just so beautiful. The dynamics of the interpersonal relationships on a field to build and create beauty and order to me is the most beautiful thing in soccer. As a math teacher and as a person of faith, there is something crazy about the patterns that work in this world. And soccer is just one of those ways to see that beauty come out. That I absolutely, goals are great, but when kids start connecting and you see a third player run with the right receipt of the ball and the communication and the excitement on the kid's face of doing something they worked on, like, to me, that is the ultimate experience in all of it. For me, again, is that poetry in motion of the game. That excites me. It's why I watch it. It's what I look for. Um, that is what is super exciting to me. And again, it keeps me up at night. That excitement to go get on the field to see it happen. Every session.
I really love the way that you finish the episode, but the way that you put that across as well, and take that into such great detail as you have right throughout the episode. So these timestamps which I have are really gonna open up so many thought processes, which I think, because there's so much to reflect upon and so many key ways that you've shaped it, which I believe are so important even for me to reflect upon and just have those ready to take away and for me to look back upon. But Alex, I really appreciate your time this morning, now this afternoon where you are. So it is much appreciated, especially on your time off as well. And it's been appreciated how quickly we could turn things around and getting this organized. But the content within this is just actually next level. And it's so much within this that I'm going to take away and really build upon. And I honestly mean that, because there's so many different notes which I've jotted out right throughout our conversation here. So there is much to take away. And we've touched upon it about 20 minutes ago, where all the outcomes within this episode that we've covered have been unreal, especially in this snapshot of 2 hours, because it's only been 2 hours in, but we could have sat here for about 4.5, 6 hours.
For
But
sure.
it's been amazing to chat to you, and I really appreciate you reaching out and making this happen today. So honestly, my thanks sits with you, and there is big appreciation, Alex. So thanks.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed our discussion and got a lot out of this. It's going to be it's beautiful to share. And to be honest, you're one of the first people I get to have this long of a conversation with around this, because they're always rushed to sessions and things like that. So I do appreciate you taking the time and everything you're creating here. So thank you again.
Absolute pleasure. Well, I'll chat to you shortly, but thank you very much for me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
How are you as well? Enjoy your break.
Thank you very much. See you
Thank you.
later.
All right.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a three, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people, because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need 3 different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other 2, and that's absolutely fine.